He rolled down his car window to tell the beggar to move away. But when the woman lifted her head, his entire world collapsed. It was his ex-wife, the woman who vanished 8 years ago. Her clothes were torn, her hands trembling, and beside her was a sign that said, "Please help, need money for medicine." What happened next would change everything Ethan Carter thought he knew about love, about family, and about the price of pride. The afternoon sun spread a golden haze across the city, gleaming on windows, catching on the hoods of cars. But Ethan Carter barely noticed. He sat in the back of his sleek black sedan, the hum of the engine steady beneath him, his attention fixed on his phone. Lines of emails filled the screen, numbers, meetings, contracts, endless details of the business empire he'd built over the last decade. His reflection in the glass showed a man in his early 40s with sharp eyes and a perfectly pressed suit, the kind of man who had learned to hide exhaustion behind control. From the driver's seat, Thomas glanced at him through the mirror and cleared his throat. "Sir, we'll be taking the route through the old district today. There's construction blocking the main road again." Ethan didn't look up. "Fine. Whatever gets us there faster." Thomas nodded and turned onto a narrower street. The car moved smoothly, passing the city's clean glass towers, the kind of places where men like Ethan ruled the world. He had a reputation for precision, for never missing a meeting, for keeping his emotions sealed behind polite efficiency. But as the skyline shifted, the glass buildings gave way to smaller ones. The light changed, filtered through smudged windows, over cracked sidewalks, graffiti, and peeling paint. The air grew heavier, carrying the mixed scent of oil, exhaust, and cheap street food. Ethan finally lifted his eyes from the phone. He hated this part of town. It always reminded him of something he'd spent years burying. Simpler days, bad choices, mistakes, and one name that lived like a ghost in the back of his mind: Grace. For years he had trained himself not to think of her, but the mind was cruel. It wandered where it shouldn't. 8 years ago, he'd been a different man. Softer, maybe even happy. Grace had changed him then. Grace with her quiet laughter that made even the worst days bearable. Grace with the warmth that money could never buy. She had loved him when he was still climbing, when success was a dream rather than a fact. Then, one night, she had simply vanished. No fight, no letter, no explanation, just gone. He'd woken to an empty bed and a silence that screamed louder than any words. At first, he'd thought she'd been hurt. He'd searched, called hospitals, even gone to the police. Then, after weeks that became months, his mother had said the words that he'd clung to like a lifeline. "She left because she was never right for you, Ethan. Forget her." And eventually, he had believed it, or pretended to. The car slowed. Traffic was thick now. Thomas muttered something about the afternoon rush. Ethan exhaled through his nose and rubbed his temples. The constant noise of the city pressed in. Horns, chatter, the distant rhythm of a busker's drum. He looked out the window without interest, watching lives he didn't understand. A woman sold oranges from a wooden cart, her face lined and brown from the sun. 2 boys in mismatched clothes kicked a flat soccer ball through the dust. A man fixed a bicycle, his fingers black with grease. They were ordinary people, living ordinary lives, and Ethan felt an odd discomfort watching them. It was the kind of discomfort that came from recognizing something human in a world he had trained himself to see only in numbers. The car stopped again at a red light. Thomas tapped his fingers on the steering wheel. Ethan glanced at the buildings on either side. Old shops with faded signs, small apartments with open windows where curtains fluttered like tired flags. Then his gaze caught something across the street. At first, it was nothing unusual. A woman kneeling near a broken streetlight, a cardboard sign in her hands. There were beggars on almost every block. His eyes passed over her and then, inexplicably, returned. The sign said, written in shaky black letters, "Please help. Need money for medicine." Her head was bowed, hair tangled, her clothes thin and dirty. A paper cup sat beside her with only a few coins inside. Ethan felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. Maybe it was guilt, maybe pity. He wasn't sure. He told himself she was just another stranger in a city full of them. But something about the curve of her shoulders, the way she held the sign, trembling but steady, pulled at him. The car behind them honked. The light had turned green. But Thomas hadn't moved. "Sir?" Thomas asked softly. Ethan didn't answer. He was staring, frozen. "Wait." Thomas frowned, confused, but kept his foot on the brake. A gust of wind blew through the street. It caught the woman's hair, lifting it just enough for sunlight to fall across her face. And Ethan's world stopped. For a second, the noise of traffic vanished. The people disappeared. There was only her face, pale beneath the dirt, thinner, older but achingly familiar. Every line, every freckle, every fragile trace of her features burned into his memory long ago. His breath caught. His body went cold. "No," he whispered. "It can't be." But it was Grace. Grace Miller. The woman he had once sworn to love forever. The woman who had disappeared into the night. The woman who had left him hollow. Ethan's hand tightened on the door handle before he even realized what he was doing. "Stop the car, sir!" Thomas turned halfway in his seat. "Stop the car, now!" The words came out sharp, commanding. Thomas immediately pulled to the curb. Before the vehicle had even come to a full stop, Ethan pushed the door open and stepped out. The heat hit him like a wave. The air smelled of smoke, sweat, and dust. His heart pounded in his chest. Across the street, Grace still knelt, her hands shaken slightly as she held the cardboard sign. Cars rushed between them, cutting her image into flickering frames like scenes from a broken film reel. Ethan stood there, motionless, unable to breathe. She had been gone for 8 years, and yet there she was, alive and begging for spare change. For a long moment, he couldn't move. He just watched her, memories flooding back, her laughter in their kitchen, the way she'd hum softly while cooking, the way she'd always reach for his hand when crossing the street. She had promised forever. And then she had vanished, leaving a hole he'd tried to fill with work, success, and silence. But the hole had never closed. He swallowed hard, throat dry. Thomas called from the car. "Sir, are you all right?" Ethan ignored him. The light changed again. He stepped off the curb. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of 8 years pressed against his chest. His shoes clicked on the asphalt, echoing faintly between the honks and the shouts of impatient drivers. Grace didn't look up. She didn't notice him crossing, didn't see the man who had once been her husband walking back into her life. He stopped right in front of her. His shadow fell over her hands. Slowly, Grace raised her head. The world seemed to tilt. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Her lips parted, eyes widening as if she had seen a ghost. The cardboard slipped from her fingers, landing softly on the ground. "Ethan," she breathed. He heard his name from her mouth for the first time in 8 years, and it broke something in him. "Grace," he said. His voice cracked. Around them, life went on. People passing, cars moving, horns blaring. But to Ethan, everything blurred into silence. He saw only her, thinner and fragile, but still Grace. Her eyes shimmered with tears. For a moment he thought she might faint. Ethan reached out a hand instinctively, then stopped, unsure if he had the right. She stepped back slightly, hugging herself, her shoulders trembling. "I never wanted you to see me like this," she whispered. "Never." Ethan's mind was spinning. Questions piled in his throat, fighting to be spoken, but only fragments came out. "Why are you? What happened to you?" Grace shook her head. "Please, not here." Ethan's control snapped. 8 years of anger and confusion crashed through him. "I came home and you were gone," he said, his voice rising. "No note, no word. Do you have any idea what that did to me? I thought you were dead. I searched for you. I called the police. Grace flinched with each word, her eyes brimming with tears. "I know," she whispered. "I know what I did. I'm sorry, Ethan." "You don't get to just say sorry," he said bitterly. "You owe me the truth. Why did you leave?" Her lips trembled. "Your mother." Ethan froze. "My mother?" Grace nodded slowly, looking down. "She came to see me every week after we married. At first I thought she wanted to know me, but she didn't. She wanted to break me." Ethan's stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" Grace's voice shook as she spoke, the words coming like a confession she had carried too long. "She said I wasn't good enough, that I was embarrassing you, that I would destroy your reputation. I tried to ignore her, Ethan. I really did. I thought if I just worked harder, she would see that I loved you. But then she changed. She started making threats, real threats." Ethan's heartbeat pounded in his ears. "What kind of threats?" "She said, if I truly loved you, I would leave. She said she would ruin my life, make sure I could never get a job, that I'd be blacklisted everywhere. She said she'd make me disappear." Grace's eyes filled with tears again. "I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I thought if I left, she would leave you alone. I thought it was the only way to protect you." Ethan stared at her, disbelief turning to rage. "You should have told me. Would you have believed me?" Grace asked quietly. 8 years ago, you still needed her approval. You wouldn't have chosen me over her." The words cut deep because they were true. Back then, he had been proud, arrogant, and too blind to see how much control his mother still held. He didn't know what he would have done, and that truth haunted him. Ethan's anger softened into guilt. "Grace," he said hoarsely, "I should have protected you. That was my job." She shook her head, wiping her eyes. "It doesn't matter now. You moved on. You're still successful, still living in that big house. And I'm here." Her voice broke. "I'm here begging for money." Ethan looked at her, really looked, and saw beyond the dirt and exhaustion. Her eyes, though tired, were still the same eyes he had fallen in love with. He wanted to reach out, to tell her that it wasn't too late, but she lifted her chin slightly, as if to reclaim what little dignity she had left. "Grace," he said gently, "let me help you. Please, let me give you something." She shook her head quickly. "No, I don't want your money." "Then what are you doing out here?" Ethan's voice rose again. "You're begging on the street." Grace's tears spilled over. "I'm not begging for me." Ethan frowned, confused. "Then who?" Grace took a shaky breath. "For my son." The words hit him like a punch. Ethan blinked, trying to understand. "Your son?" Grace nodded, tears running down her cheeks. "His name is Noah. He's 8 years old, and he's very sick." For a moment, Ethan couldn't breathe. 8 years. The math hit him like thunder. He staggered back, hand on his chest. You had a son? Our son? Grace nodded again. He looks just like you. Same eyes, same smile. Ethan's vision blurred. He felt the ground tilt beneath him. His voice came out in a whisper. I have a son. Grace reached out as if to steady him, but he stepped closer first, his hands trembling. Where is he? Where's Noah? At home. He's too weak to come outside. Grace looked terrified. Ethan, please, don't. Don't what? Ethan's voice hardened. Don't see my own child? Grace looked down. I don't want you to see where we live. It's bad. Ethan's jaw tightened. I don't care about that. Take me to him. Now. Grace searched his face and saw something there, a fire she hadn't seen before. She nodded slowly. All right, but it's far. We'll need to take a bus. Ethan glanced back at his car where Thomas was watching, bewildered. No, he said firmly. We're driving. He gently took Grace's arm. Her thin wrist fitting easily into his hand. Come on. Thomas opened the door as they crossed the street. Change of plans, Ethan said sharply. Cancel the meeting. We're going somewhere else. Yes, sir, Thomas replied. He didn't ask why. Grace climbed into the car hesitantly, her worn dress brushing against the leather seat. She looked out the window, avoiding Ethan's gaze. The car pulled away from the curb. Ethan couldn't sit still. His mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, questions, regrets, and the overwhelming image of a boy he had never met. Grace, he said quietly, tell me about him. She smiled faintly through her tears. He's wonderful, Ethan, smart and kind. He loves to draw. He wants to be an astronaut someday. Ethan's throat tightened. Does he know about me? Grace shook her head slowly. I told him his father was a good man who couldn't be with us. I didn't want him to think you abandoned him. Ethan looked out the window, jaw clenched. The city blurred by, blocks of light and shadow. He whispered to himself, 8 years, 8 years I missed. Grace wiped her face and said softly, He's sick, Ethan. That's all that matters now. Ethan turned to her, eyes burning. Then, let's go save our son. The city outside the car window blurred into streaks of light and motion, but Ethan Carter barely saw any of it. His mind was spinning faster than the passing streets. The woman sitting next to him, the woman he thought he had lost forever, had just told him that somewhere out there, a little boy carried his name, his blood, his smile. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. He couldn't decide whether he wanted to cry, scream, or simply disappear into the guilt that clawed at his chest. Across from him, Grace sat stiffly, her hands twisting together on her lap. She stared out the window, her reflection in the glass faint and fragile. The expensive scent of leather inside the car mixed strangely with the faint smell of her clothes. Old fabric, city dust, and something like cheap soap. Ethan caught the scent, and it twisted the knife deeper. She had once smelled of lavender and clean sheets and home. Grace didn't speak. Her eyes followed the scenery. Old warehouses, graffiti walls, small grocery stands. Every few seconds she glanced at Ethan as if to confirm he was really there. It had been so long since she'd sat beside him, long since she'd allowed herself to even imagine it. The silence between them was thick with years of unsaid words. Finally, Ethan broke it. Tell me about him, he said softly. Grace's fingers stilled. She swallowed hard. Noah, she whispered. His name is Noah. He's 8. He loves books. He draws little rockets and planets all over the walls." She gave a faint smile, one filled with pride and heartbreak. "He says he's going to be an astronaut one day." Ethan's throat tightened. Astronaut. The word felt like a dream he'd never been part of. "Does he—" Ethan hesitated, then forced the question out. "Does he know about me?" Grace turned to him, guilt flickering in her eyes. "I told him his father was a good man," she said quietly. "Someone who loved him, but couldn't be with us. I told him you were far away, that you were fighting dragons." Ethan blinked. "Fighting dragons?" Grace gave a small, sad laugh. "I couldn't tell him the truth, Ethan. I couldn't tell him that his grandmother drove me away or that I left to protect him. I wanted him to believe you were good, not absent. I wanted him to believe in something." Ethan stared ahead, jaw clenched, his reflection in the window suddenly unbearable. Grace shifted slightly, clutching her torn purse to her chest. "He's been sick for months," she said after a pause. "It started with fevers, then bruises that wouldn't fade. He got so tired he could barely walk. I took him to the free clinic. They said something about his blood." Ethan turned sharply. "What did they say exactly?" Grace pulled out a crumpled paper from her purse and handed it to him. Her hands shook as she did. The paper was creased and stained, the ink slightly smudged, but Ethan could make out the words, "possible anemia." Further tests required. The note might as well have been written in fire. His chest felt tight. "And you can't afford treatment?" Grace shook her head. "They told me to see a specialist. It costs $300 just for the appointment. The medicine is $2,000 a month. I've been trying to save. I begged. I sold everything we had. I even sold my wedding ring." Her voice cracked on the last words. Ethan closed his eyes. He remembered the ring. Small, simple, the one she had chosen because she said she wanted love, not diamonds. The image of it sitting on some pawn shop counter made his stomach twist. "You shouldn't have had to go through this," he said quietly. Grace looked away. "I didn't have a choice." "You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to be the woman begging on the street? I'd rather die than do that, but he's my son. I'll do anything for him." Ethan's hand clenched on his knee. He turned to her, voice firm. "I'll take care of it. Everything." Grace shook her head quickly. "No, I don't want your money. This isn't charity. This is my family," Ethan said. "He's my son, ours, and I'm not letting him suffer because of what my mother did." Grace's lips trembled, but she said nothing more. She turned her face toward the window again. Outside, the buildings grew smaller and older. The roads narrowed. Potholes jolted the car. Children played barefoot on the sidewalks, and laundry hung from lines like faded flags. When the car stopped at a red light, Ethan saw a boy about 10 running past, his laughter echoing. The sound hit him like a memory of something he'd never had, his own son's laughter, a sound stolen by years of silence. Grace pointed ahead quietly. "It's that building," she said. "Riverside Apartments, Building C, 3rd floor." Ethan looked where she pointed. The building leaned slightly, its paint flaking off in strips. A window was covered with cardboard. The entrance door hung crooked on its hinges. It looked more like a place people escaped from than lived in. He swallowed hard. Thomas parked at the curb. Ethan got out first, the heat immediately wrapping around him. The smell of damp concrete and garbage filled the air. Grace got out slowly, clutching her purse. She looked nervous, embarrassed, like someone stepping back into a place they didn't want to be seen. Ethan followed her up the cracked steps. The rail wobbled under his hand. On the second floor, a door opened and a woman peered out, holding a baby on her hip. She looked at Grace and nodded slightly, recognition in her tired eyes. Grace gave her a small smile and kept walking. On the third floor, the hallway lights flickered. Water stains marked the ceiling. Grace stopped at a door with a crooked number 7. She hesitated, key trembling in her fingers. Ethan stood behind her, his heart hammering. "Grace," he said softly, "before we go in." What does he know? About you? About us? She looked at him. He knows I love him. That's all that matters. Then she turned the key. The door creaked open. The smell hit first. Old air, damp wood, something faintly metallic. The apartment was one small room. A mattress on the floor served as a bed. There was a single crate with a hot plate on top, a few dishes stacked beside it. The wallpaper peeled in long strips. A single window let in weak sunlight through dirty glass. On the mattress lay a boy, small and pale, his breathing shallow. Ethan froze. He couldn't move. Grace dropped to her knees beside the mattress. "Noah," she said gently, "it's Mama. I'm home, and I brought someone to meet you." The boy stirred. His eyes fluttered open. They were brown. Ethan's brown. The same color, the same curious light. The boy blinked, trying to focus. His voice was barely a whisper. "Mama, who's that?" Ethan stepped closer, kneeling beside them. Grace brushed a hand through the boy's hair. "This is your father," she said softly. The boy blinked again, confusion and wonder mixing in his face. "My dad?" Ethan's throat closed. "Hi, buddy," he said, his voice breaking. "Yeah, I'm your dad." For a moment, the boy just stared at him. Then, slowly, a small smile formed on his lips. "Mama said you were a good man," he whispered. "She said you'd come if you knew about me." Ethan's eyes filled with tears he couldn't hold back. "She was right," he said. "And I'm here now. And I'm going to make you better. I promise." The boy coughed weakly. "I don't feel good." Ethan's chest constricted. He looked around the tiny room, at the threadbare blanket, at the empty shelves, at the glass of water on the floor half full and cloudy. He saw Grace's hands trembling as she reached for her son, and something inside him shattered. He had built an empire of steel and glass while his family had lived like this. He felt ashamed of every expensive dinner, every meaningless meeting, every time he'd told himself he was successful. "Grace," he said firmly, "get whatever he needs. We're taking him to the hospital right now. Michael, I told you I can't afford—" Ethan cut her off. "Watch me. Help me wrap him in this blanket." Grace hesitated, then nodded. Together they lifted the boy, wrapping him gently. Noah weighed almost nothing. His arms were thin as sticks, his skin pale and warm from fever. When Ethan picked him up, the boy's head fell against his shoulder, and Ethan felt a jolt of emotion so fierce it took his breath away. He was holding his son for the first time. "Hold on, buddy," he whispered. "We're going to get you help." Grace grabbed a small bag with a few belongings, a toothbrush, a worn picture book, a change of clothes. Then they hurried down the stairs, past the peeling walls and the rusted rail. Outside, Thomas looked up in shock when he saw Ethan carrying the boy. He jumped out and opened the back door immediately. "St. Mary's Medical Center," Ethan ordered. "And don't spare the speed." Thomas nodded, eyes wide. "Yes, sir." The car engine roared to life. Grace climbed in beside Ethan, cradling Noah's head in her lap. Ethan held his son's small hand. The boy's eyes were half closed, his lips pale. "Stay with me, Noah," Ethan said. "We're almost there." Grace stroked the boy's hair, whispering softly, "Stay with us, baby. Please." The car raced through traffic. Horns blared. The city flew past in streaks of color. Ethan didn't blink. He couldn't. Every second felt like a lifetime. He could feel Noah's weak pulse against his palm. "Don't you dare leave me," he whispered. "I just found you." Finally, the hospital came into view, a white building with red letters glowing against the fading afternoon. "Hold on," Ethan murmured. "We're here." Thomas stopped at the emergency entrance. Ethan was out of the car before it fully stopped, carrying Noah in his arms. "Help!" he shouted. "I need help!" Nurses turned immediately. A woman in blue scrubs ran forward, eyes widening as she saw the boy's limp body. "In here," she said. "Quickly." They placed Noah on a gurney and rolled him through the automatic doors. Ethan tried to follow, but another nurse stopped him gently. "Sir, please, we need space to work. He's in good hands. We'll update you soon." Ethan stood frozen in the hallway, breathing hard. Grace caught up beside him, her face pale, eyes wide. "Come," she whispered, pointing to the waiting area. "We have to wait." Ethan sat down for a second, then stood up again, pacing like a trapped animal. He could still feel the warmth of his son's body against his arms. Still hear the faint rasp of his breath. He looked at Grace, sitting with her hands clasped tightly, lips moving in silent prayer. "When was the last time you ate?" he asked suddenly. Grace blinked at him, surprised. "What? When did you last eat something?" She hesitated. "Yesterday, maybe the day before." "I had some rice." Ethan clenched his fists. "Stay here," he said. "I'll be back." He walked quickly down the hall until he found the hospital cafeteria. It was small, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly. He bought everything he could carry: sandwiches, soup, juice, fruit. When he returned, Grace's eyes widened. "Ethan, that's too much. Eat," he said simply, setting the food down beside her. "Please." She picked up a sandwich hesitantly, took a small bite, then another. Then her hunger took over, and she ate silently, tears falling onto the bread. Ethan sat beside her, watching. He felt a lump rise in his throat again. This woman had given up everything for their son. He reached out and touched her hand. Grace looked up, startled. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For what?" she whispered. "For everything. For not protecting you. For not finding you. For not knowing." Grace shook her head. "You couldn't have known." "But I should have," Ethan said. "I should have looked harder." Grace gave a tired smile. "You can't change the past, Ethan. Only the present." Before he could answer, a nurse appeared. "Mr. Carter?" Ethan jumped to his feet. "Yes, the doctor would like to speak with you. Follow me, please." Ethan and Grace followed her down the hall into a small office where a gray-haired man sat behind a desk. He stood when they entered. "I'm Dr. Peterson," he said kindly. "Please, sit." "How is my son?" Ethan asked immediately. The doctor smiled gently. "He's stable. We've given him fluids and run some tests." Grace's voice trembled. "What's wrong with him?" Dr. Peterson looked at the papers on his desk. "Your son has acute anemia. His body isn't producing enough red blood cells." "Is it treatable?" Ethan asked quickly. "Yes, the doctor said. It will require medication, regular transfusions, and close monitoring. With proper care, he can live a normal life. Grace let out a sob of relief. Thank God. But the doctor's tone softened. The treatment is expensive. The medication alone costs about $2,000 a month, plus hospital visits. Ethan didn't hesitate. Do whatever he needs. Money is not a problem. The doctor nodded. Good. We'll begin treatment immediately. He'll stay for at least a week. Can we see him? Grace asked. Of course. He's awake and asking for his mother. They followed the doctor to room 302. Inside, Noah lay on a clean hospital bed, a small IV in his arm. His face was still pale but peaceful. Mama, he whispered. Grace rushed to his side, taking his hand. I'm here, baby. The doctor said you'll be okay. Noah smiled faintly. The medicine feels funny. Ethan stood at the foot of the bed, unsure how to move, how to speak. He had missed so much. But then Noah looked up at him with those familiar brown eyes. You stayed, he said. Ethan's voice caught. Of course I stayed. I thought maybe you'd leave again, Noah said sleepily. Ethan's chest ached. Never again, he said softly. I'm here for good. Noah smiled, closing his eyes. Mama says you used to fight dragons, he murmured. Ethan looked at Grace. She smiled shyly. Is that true, Daddy? The boy whispered. Ethan reached out, brushing his son's hair back gently. Not anymore, buddy, he said. I found something worth fighting for right here. Noah smiled again, drifting off to sleep. Ethan looked at Grace across the bed. She mouthed 2 words silently. Thank you. Ethan shook his head. He didn't deserve thanks, not yet. But as he stood there, watching his son sleep peacefully for the first time, he made a silent vow. Whatever it took, whatever he had to do, he would never let them suffer again. The boy was his blood, his life, his second chance. And this time, Ethan would not fail. The night at St. Mary's settled heavy and bright. The corridors washed in white light that never slept. Ethan Carter sat beside his son's bed, elbows on his knees, fingers laced so tightly the knuckles turned white. Every few seconds he looked up to watch the slow rise and fall of Noah's chest. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the silence like a metronome. Steady but fragile. He had closed multi-million-dollar deals, faced boardrooms full of rivals, but this, waiting for a child he'd just met to live or die, was the first time he had ever truly felt fear. Across from him, Grace sat curled in the plastic chair, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the IV machine. Exhaustion had carved deep shadows under her eyes. She was still wearing the same torn dress from the street, its fabric stiff from dust. A nurse had offered her a blanket earlier, but she draped it over Noah instead. Ethan studied her quietly. Even worn down and pale, she carried that same quiet strength that had once steadied him. For years, he'd buried the memory of her laugh, the warmth of her touch, but sitting here brought it all flooding back. It hurt and healed all at once. A soft knock broke the silence. Dr. Peterson stepped in holding a clipboard. He gave them both a reassuring smile. "How's he doing?" Ethan asked immediately. The doctor checked the monitor. "Better. The fluids are helping. We'll keep running tests tonight, but his vitals have stabilized. You should rest, both of you." Ethan exhaled, half relief, half disbelief. Rest sounded impossible. When the doctor left, the door clicked softly behind him, and quiet reclaimed the room. Grace leaned forward, brushing Noah's hair back. The boy stirred slightly, murmuring something about rockets. Ethan smiled faintly despite everything. He likes space, doesn't he? Grace nodded. Every night he talks about the stars. He says they make him feel less small. Ethan looked at his son's thin hand resting in hers. He thought about the kind of courage it took to keep believing in stars when life gave you nothing but darkness. He envied that innocence. After a while, Grace looked up. "You should go home, Ethan. You've been awake all day." "I'm not leaving him," Ethan said simply. "You need to rest, too." She shook her head. "I'll be fine." Ethan leaned back, exhaustion seeping into his bones. He hadn't eaten since the cafeteria hours ago, but hunger didn't matter. What mattered was the little boy breathing in front of him and the woman who had risked everything to keep that boy alive. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. Nurses moved quietly in the hallway, their shoes whispering across the linoleum. Somewhere down the corridor, someone laughed softly. Somewhere else, someone cried. The hospital carried every emotion of the city within its walls. Ethan stared out the window. The nightlights of downtown flickered in the distance. Somewhere out there, his office tower stood, glass and steel shining coldly under the moon. That world seemed miles away now, as if it belonged to another man. He checked his phone. 17 missed calls, 32 messages, all from partners and assistants asking where he was. For the first time, he didn't care. He turned the phone off, set it face down, and looked back at Noah. The boy's breathing had steadied, deeper now. Grace's eyes had finally closed, her head resting against the chair, body limp from exhaustion. Ethan stood and gently lifted her small frame, carrying her to the small couch against the wall. She stirred, but didn't wake. He draped his suit jacket over her as a blanket and returned to the chair beside his son. His heart felt raw, stretched between guilt and wonder. He whispered softly to the sleeping child, "I've got you now. Both of you, I promise." The night moved slowly, hour by hour. Nurses came in, checked IV lines, adjusted machines. Each time Ethan asked questions. "Is that normal? Is he still stable?" They answered patiently, "Yes, sir, everything's fine." Around 3 a.m., the nurse with the kind eyes from earlier returned. She smiled when she saw him still sitting upright. "You haven't slept a minute, have you?" "Can't," Ethan admitted. She adjusted the monitor, glancing at Grace on the couch. "You must really love them." The words caught him off guard. He hesitated, then nodded. "More than anything." The nurse smiled again, wrote something on her clipboard, and left. Ethan leaned back and closed his eyes for the first time, not to sleep, but to remember. He remembered Grace in their old kitchen, humming while stirring coffee. He remembered how she'd danced barefoot on the hardwood floor when he'd first gotten promoted, how she'd told him she didn't care about the money, just that they were together. He remembered the argument before she left, small, meaningless, about a dinner with his mother that Grace hadn't wanted to attend. If only he had noticed how scared she'd been. The guilt was unbearable. He rubbed his face and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Grace. I should have protected you." Morning crept in slowly, pale light bleeding through the blinds. Grace stirred, blinking as she woke. Her first glance was to Noah. When she saw him still breathing peacefully, relief softened her whole face. She looked at Ethan. "Did you sleep?" "No," he said. "Did you?" "A little." She sat beside him, and for a while they just watched their son. The light painted the room gold, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt something like peace. Around 8 a.m., Dr. Peterson returned with new test results. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. I have encouraging news. Noah's responding to treatment faster than expected. The transfusion improved his count significantly. He'll need continued medication, but he's out of immediate danger. Grace let out a small cry, covering her mouth with both hands. Tears filled her eyes. Ethan exhaled shakily. Thank you, Doctor. Peterson smiled. He's a strong kid. Keep him nourished, keep him positive. That's as important as medicine. He gave a reassuring nod and left. Ethan turned to Grace, unable to stop himself from smiling for the first time in days. She laughed softly through her tears. He's going to be okay. He's going to live. Ethan reached over and took her hand. We'll make sure of it. She squeezed back, silent but grateful. Later that morning, nurses brought breakfast trays, scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice. The smell filled the small room with warmth. Noah woke as they set the tray down. His eyes opened slowly, clearer now, less cloudy. Hey, buddy, Ethan said. Hungry? A little, Noah murmured. Grace helped him sit up, fluffing his pillow. The boy ate small bites, chewing slowly. Ethan watched every motion like a man witnessing a miracle. The sound of cutlery, the sight of his son lifting a spoon, felt holy. Between bites, Noah glanced at Ethan shyly. Are you staying? Of course, Ethan said. I thought maybe you'd leave again. Never again, Ethan said firmly. I promise. Noah smiled. Mama said you used to fight dragons. Ethan looked at Grace, who blushed faintly. She told you that? The boy nodded. Are they gone now? Ethan smiled. Every last one. Noah grinned weakly. Good. I was worried. Grace laughed softly, and the sound washed through Ethan like sunlight after rain. For a few moments, they were just a family having breakfast in a hospital room. No money, no lies, just quiet, fragile peace. Around midday, Ethan stepped out to stretch his legs. The hospital smelled of coffee and disinfectant, a scent that would forever remind him of this turning point. He passed by the pediatric wing's playroom, bright murals of animals and rockets on the walls. He thought about how Noah might smile there once he was stronger. He imagined bringing him home, showing him the garden, teaching him how to ride a bike. Each image tightened and deadened his throat. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He'd forgotten to turn it back on. A flood of messages poured in. He deleted them all, but one he kept. A missed call from Mother. He stared at the name for a long time, then pressed the screen dark again. Not yet. When he returned to the room, Grace was telling Noah a story about stars. Ethan listened quietly. Her voice was soft, melodic, the same tone she used to use when reading to him years ago. The boy's eyes glowed with imagination. When she finished, he clapped his small hands weakly and smiled. Ethan thought he could live forever in that moment. Later, as the afternoon sun slanted across the window, Grace dozed again, her hand still resting on Noah's arm. Ethan watched them, a strange calm settling in his chest. He realized how empty his life had been without this, without love, without connection, without purpose. All the money, all the prestige. It had built walls, not homes. He felt anger rise again, not at them, but at his mother. She had stolen this from him. 8 years of birthdays, first words, first steps. He whispered to himself, she'll have to answer for it. Evening arrived in gentle layers of orange and pink across the sky. A nurse came in to check vitals. Noah was asleep again, breathing steadily. The nurse looked at Ethan. He's doing well. You should get dinner, sir. Ethan nodded but didn't move. He sat watching the soft rise and fall of Noah's chest. Grace woke and joined him at the window. Outside, the city glowed alive. They stood in silence for a while before she spoke. "You called her, didn't you?" Ethan shook his head. "Not yet." Grace looked down. "You'll have to, eventually. I know." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm afraid of her, Ethan, even after all these years." He looked at her. "You don't have to be. Not anymore." Grace turned her face toward him. "How can you say that so calmly? She destroyed everything." Ethan's voice lowered. "And I'm going to make her see what she did." Grace searched his face, worried. "Don't go there angry. Anger makes people cruel." Ethan smiled faintly. "I'm done being cruel. I just want the truth." Grace nodded slowly, though fear still lingered in her eyes. A few minutes later, Noah stirred in his sleep and called softly, "Mama." Grace hurried to his side, taking his hand. Ethan stood behind her, watching the two people who had unknowingly saved him from his own emptiness. He reached out and laid a hand on Grace's shoulder. She looked up. "Go to sleep," he whispered. "I'll stay awake." She wanted to argue, but couldn't. Exhaustion won. She leaned back against the chair, eyes fluttering closed. Ethan sat through the night again, eyes never leaving the bed. Every so often, he whispered stories about heroes and second chances. He didn't realize tears were sliding down his face until one dropped onto his hand. He wiped it away roughly and whispered, "You're safe now, Noah. I promise you'll never be alone again." Somewhere before dawn, the door creaked open and the kind nurse peeked in. Still awake, she whispered. Ethan smiled faintly. "Couldn't sleep even if I tried." She nodded knowingly. "You'd be surprised how many fathers say that." She adjusted the IV quietly. "He's lucky to have you." Ethan looked at his sleeping son. "No," he said softly. "I'm the lucky one." After she left, Ethan walked to the window again. The city was silent, only the occasional taxi gliding through the streets. He took a deep breath, tasting the morning before it arrived. Tomorrow, he would face his mother. Tomorrow, he would finally tell her the truth. But tonight, he allowed himself to feel gratitude to this child who had given him purpose, to the woman who had given everything for their son, and to the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they could still rebuild the life that had been stolen from them. The first light of dawn touched the skyline, and Ethan whispered into the stillness, "This is where it begins." Morning light filtered through the blinds of St. Mary's, soft and hesitant. Ethan Carter stood by the hospital window, coffee untouched in his hand, watching the city awaken. Cars crawled along the distant highway like beads of light, but his thoughts were miles away. He had barely slept, not because of worry this time, but because of what he knew he had to do. Today, he would face his mother. The very thought made his stomach tighten. In the bed behind him, Noah slept peacefully, his small frame cocooned in white sheets. Grace sat nearby, humming softly as she folded the clothes a nurse had lent her. She looked calmer this morning, but there was a fragile edge in her smile, as if any sudden sound could shatter it. Ethan turned from the window. The air between them was heavy with unspoken questions. Grace finally broke the silence. "You're going to her, aren't you?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He set the coffee down and slipped on his jacket. "I have to." Grace's hands stilled on the fabric. "Do you think she'll listen?" He gave a short, humorless laugh. "She'll listen this time." Grace looked at him, fear flickering in her eyes. "Don't go there angry. Anger makes people cruel." Ethan met her gaze. This isn't about anger anymore. It's about truth. She hesitated, then stood and touched his arm. Promise me one thing. Promise you'll come back calm. Noah needs you whole. Ethan nodded slowly. I promise. He bent down to kiss Noah's forehead. The boy stirred, murmuring something about stars, then settled again. Ethan's chest tightened. I'll be back soon, he whispered. Then he turned and left. The drive to the Carter estate felt longer than ever. The city faded behind him, replaced by clean suburban roads lined with trees and manicured lawns. His car rolled through the gates of the sprawling mansion that had once felt like home and now looked like a museum of everything hollow in his life. The driveway curved past fountains and marble statues his mother had imported from Italy. Ethan remembered being a child, running past those statues with scraped knees, only to be scolded for acting like a street boy. The memory made his jaw clench. Thomas parked by the front steps. Ethan got out slowly, the crisp morning air sharp against his face. The house loomed ahead, tall and cold, its windows dark. He could almost feel the chill of judgment already waiting inside. The door opened before he could knock. Mrs. Carter's housekeeper, an elderly woman named Margaret, stood there, wringing her hands. Ethan, she said softly, surprised. We didn't know you were coming. I need to see my mother, right away. Margaret hesitated. She's in the conservatory, sir. Ethan nodded and stepped past her. The scent of roses and polish hung in the air. Everything was immaculate. Crystal vases, marble floors, paintings perfectly centered. Not a trace of dust, not a sign of life. His footsteps echoed down the hall. He reached the conservatory door and paused. Through the glass, he saw his mother sitting by the window, a cup of tea balanced delicately in her hand. She was dressed in pale silk, her silver hair perfectly arranged. To anyone else, she looked like dignity itself. To Ethan, she looked like the architect of his misery. He pushed the door open. The hinges creaked softly. Mrs. Carter turned, eyebrows lifting. Ethan, what a surprise. You didn't call ahead. Her voice was smooth, calm. The same voice that had once soothed him as a child and manipulated him as a man. We need to talk, Mother. She gestured to a chair across from her. Then talk. He stayed standing. I found her. The words hung heavy in the air. For a moment, Mrs. Carter didn't move. Then she set her teacup down with deliberate care. Found who? Grace. She's alive. Mrs. Carter's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened around the porcelain handle. I see. And how is she? Begging on the street, Ethan said bitterly, and raising my son. Mrs. Carter's eyes flickered just once. Your son. So it's true. He took a step closer. You knew, didn't you? You knew she was pregnant when you drove her away. Mrs. Carter's gaze stayed steady. I did what was necessary. Necessary? Ethan's voice rose. You ruined 3 lives. You took my wife, my child, 8 years of their lives because you thought she wasn't good enough? Mrs. Carter's tone turned sharp. She wasn't. She was kind, yes, but naive, unrefined. She didn't belong in this family. She would have destroyed everything your father built. Ethan laughed harshly. What father built? A company? A name? You destroyed everything that mattered, Mother. You talk about bloodlines and class, but you don't understand love. Mrs. Carter's face hardened. Love doesn't feed a legacy. Love doesn't protect you when people come for your power. Ethan's voice cracked with rage. "And what has your power given you? A son who hates what he's become? A grandson you almost killed?" Mrs. Carter stood now, her posture perfect even in confrontation. "Don't you dare accuse me. Everything I did was for you, so you could have a life worth living, so you wouldn't end up with nothing." "I already have nothing," Ethan shouted, "because you took it all from me." He turned away, breathing hard. Silence stretched between them, sharp and brittle. Finally, Mrs. Carter spoke again, quieter. "You're emotional. You always were when it came to her. You'll see reason eventually." Ethan looked back at her, eyes cold. "The only reason I see is that you're a coward. You were afraid she'd take me away from you. That's why you made her leave." Mrs. Carter's lips pressed into a thin line. "You think you understand everything. You were a child playing at love." Ethan stepped closer until they were face to face. "She loved me, and I loved her. That should have been enough." Mrs. Carter's composure wavered, the first crack in her armor. "What do you want from me, Ethan? I want you to face what you've done. I want you to apologize to Grace, and to your grandson." Mrs. Carter blinked, shock flickering across her features. Grandson. The word seemed to age her. "He's 8, Ethan said softly. "He's been sick for months. Grace begged strangers on the street to buy his medicine. While you hosted charity galas and bragged about the Carter name." Mrs. Carter sank slowly back into her chair. Her voice came out small. "Sick? He's dying without treatment," Ethan said. "I saved him. Not your money, not your name, me." For the first time, she didn't meet his eyes. The silence that followed stretched long and trembling. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "I didn't know. You didn't want to know. You wanted obedience. You got it. Now you can live with it." Ethan turned to leave. His mother's voice stopped him at the door. "Ethan, wait." He turned slowly. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her cup again, missing it by an inch. "I never meant for her to suffer like that." "Then why did you let her?" he asked quietly. Mrs. Carter looked out the window instead of answering. The garden beyond was perfect. Roses in precise rows, trimmed hedges, but sterile, lifeless. "I thought I was protecting you," she said finally. "From pain, from scandal. I thought love would fade." "It didn't," Ethan said. "It grew, and it gave me a son." Mrs. Carter's eyes glistened now. The first tear she'd let fall in years slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, as if ashamed. "Where are they now?" "At the hospital. St. Mary's. I want to see him." Ethan studied her for a long moment. "This isn't about you," he said. He turned and walked out before she could answer. As he left the conservatory, he passed Margaret, who stood silently in the hallway. Margaret's eyes were damp. "I heard shouting, sir." Ethan paused. "She told you to send Grace away, didn't she?" Margaret hesitated, then nodded faintly. "I tried to stop her. I'm sorry." Ethan nodded once. "It's done now." Outside, the sun was high and blinding. He got into the car, slammed the door, and leaned back, his hands trembling. Thomas glanced at him through the mirror but said nothing. "Back to the hospital," Ethan said hoarsely. The drive back was a blur. When they arrived, Grace was sitting by Noah's bed, reading from a picture book. The boy's cheeks had more color today. When he saw Ethan, he smiled faintly. "Daddy." Ethan's heart melted at the word. He crossed the room and ruffled his son's hair. "How's my astronaut?" The boy grinned sleepily. "Getting better. The doctor says I'm winning." Ethan chuckled softly. "That's my boy." Grace closed the book, watching him carefully. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the storm in his eyes. "How did it go?" she asked quietly. Ethan hesitated. "I told her everything." Grace's fingers tightened on the book. "And?" Ethan exhaled. "She's coming." Grace's face paled. "No, Ethan, I can't see her. Not after what she did. You don't have to talk to her," he said, "but she needs to see what her pride cost." Grace looked away. "I don't want her pity." "It's not pity," Ethan said softly. "It's reckoning." Hours later, as the sun began to set, the sound of heels echoed down the hospital corridor. Nurses glanced up as Mrs. Carter entered, elegant as always, but with a stiffness that betrayed her nerves. She carried no flowers, no jewelry, just a handbag and a pale expression. When she stepped into Noah's room, the air seemed to change. Grace rose immediately, standing protectively near the bay-up missus. Carter froze in the doorway, her eyes landing on the boy first. Noah looked up, curious. "Grandma?" he asked softly. Grace's breath caught. Mrs. Carter's hand went to her mouth. She crossed the room slowly, as if afraid he might vanish if she moved too fast. She knelt beside the bed. "Hello, Noah," she whispered. The boy smiled faintly. "Mama said you were sick, too." Mrs. Carter's eyes filled with tears. "I am," she said quietly. "My heart isn't very strong anymore, but it's stronger now that I've seen you." Grace turned away, tears in her eyes. Ethan stood near the window, arms folded, watching his mother struggle to hold her composure. Mrs. Carter reached for Noah's hand. "You're very brave," she said. He nodded. "Daddy says brave people tell the truth." Mrs. Carter's lips trembled. "Then your father is wiser than I was." She looked up at Grace. Her voice shook. "I owe you both an apology." Grace's eyes stayed cold. "For what, exactly?" "For everything," Mrs. Carter said. "For my pride, for my cruelty. For stealing 8 years from you." Grace said nothing. Mrs. Carter looked at Ethan next. "For taking your peace, my son." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "I told myself I was protecting you," Mrs. Carter continued. "But the truth is I was jealous. You loved her more than you ever loved me, and I couldn't stand it." Grace blinked, stunned. Ethan closed his eyes, hearing in those words both confession and tragedy. Mrs. Carter lowered her head. "I've lived long enough to know what pride costs. It costs love and family. And when the body grows old, pride can't hold your hand." She turned back to Grace. "I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness." Grace's voice came softly. "I forgive you." Mrs. Carter looked up, startled. Grace's eyes were wet, her voice trembling. "Not because you deserve it, but because my son deserves peace." The room fell silent. Then Mrs. Carter began to cry quietly, shoulders shaking. Noah reached out and took her hand, small fingers curling around hers. "It's okay, Grandma," he whispered. "You can be in our family now." Mrs. Carter looked at him, eyes shining. "Thank you, sweetheart." Ethan watched them, feeling something inside him loosen, a knot that had been strangling him for years. The hatred he'd carried so long began to dissolve. Grace turned to him, her gaze soft. "It's over, Ethan." He nodded slowly. For the first time, it truly was. The doctor entered then, smiling broadly. "Good news, everyone. Noah's blood counts are improving faster than we hoped. If this continues, he can go home by the end of the week. Home. The word felt strange and new. Grace looked at Ethan, unsure. He met her eyes. You're coming back to the house, both of you. Grace hesitated. Ethan, He took her hand gently. No more hiding, no more running. We start over, together. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she nodded. Mrs. Carter wiped her eyes and stood. I'll have the West Wing prepared. Grace looked startled, but Ethan smiled faintly. He's not living in a wing, Mother. He's living with us. Mrs. Carter blinked, then laughed softly, the first genuine sound from her in years. Then, I suppose I'll just have to learn to share the dinner table. That night, as the city lights blinked outside, Ethan sat by Noah's bed, his mother on one side, Grace on the other. 3 generations linked by blood and brokenness, mended by forgiveness. The monitors hummed quietly. The scent of antiseptic mingled with the faint sweetness of roses from the small bouquet Mrs. Carter had brought after all. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt the house of his heart rebuild itself. Not the cold mansion he grew up in, but something smaller, warmer, alive. As he looked at Grace and his son, he realized that redemption didn't come through success or vengeance. It came through choosing love again, even when it hurt. He leaned forward, brushing Noah's hair gently. Sleep, little astronaut, he whispered. We're finally home. The morning after Noah's final treatment carried the stillness of a new chapter. The light through the hospital blinds was softer than usual, almost golden, as if the sun itself wanted to bless what had survived the storm. Ethan Carter sat quietly beside his son's bed, his hand resting over the small rise and fall of Noah's chest. Every breath the boy took was a reminder that miracles did not always roar. Sometimes they whispered. Grace was packing the few belongings they had gathered during their stay. A sketchbook, a pair of socks with stars on them, the picture book Noah loved most. Her movements were slow, almost reverent, like someone afraid to wake from a dream that had finally become real. Across the room, Mrs. Carter stood by the window, looking older than before but lighter somehow. She was dressed simply, in soft gray, her hair loose around her shoulders. For the first time in Ethan's memory, she looked human, not sculpted. The machines had been removed the night before. Noah was no longer attached to wires or IVs, just a boy now, small and bright and alive. He stirred and blinked at the light. "Mornin'," he said, voice sleepy. "Mornin', sweetheart," Grace said, rushing to his side. "How do you feel?" "Like I could run to the moon," he said with a grin. Ethan laughed, the sound breaking through the quiet like sunlight through glass. The nurse came in then, cheerful, holding the discharge papers. "Ready to go home, Mr. Carter?" Ethan smiled. "More than ever." Mrs. Carter moved closer, laying a gentle hand on Noah's hair. The boy looked up and beamed. "Grandma, are you coming with us?" Mrs. Carter hesitated, eyes glistening. "If your parents will have me." Noah's gaze turned to Ethan and Grace, innocent and certain. "You have to. Families stick together." Grace met Ethan's eyes. He gave a small nod. "Of course she's coming," Grace said softly. "We're all family now." Mrs. Carter blinked hard, a tear slipping free before she could stop it. "Thank you," she whispered. The ride home was quiet but full of a peace that none of them had felt in years. The city rolled past outside, vibrant and indifferent, but inside the car everything was new. Noah leaned against Grace's shoulder, tracing shapes on the fogged window. Ethan watched them from the corner of his eye, one hand loosely on the steering wheel, the other resting near Noah's knee, as if to reassure himself the boy was really there. Mrs. Carter sat beside him, silent, her gaze fixed on the world flashing by. She spoke only once. "This is the first time we've ridden together in 8 years," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "Then let's not waste another day." The Carter mansion looked different when they arrived. The gardens were still immaculate, the fountains still running, but something had shifted. The air felt warmer, as if the house had been waiting all this time for laughter to return. Margaret opened the door, her face breaking into a smile when she saw them. "Master Noah," she gasped, dropping to her knees. "Look at you. You look just like your father did at your age." Noah giggled, shy but happy. "Thank you, ma'am." Ethan placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "This is Margaret. She's been here since before I could walk. She makes the best chocolate cake in the state." Noah's eyes widened. "Really?" Mrs. Carter smiled faintly. "Still does." The housekeeper wiped her eyes. "Welcome home, all of you." They stepped inside. The marble floors gleamed as always, but for the first time they didn't feel cold. Grace stopped in the foyer, overwhelmed. The last time she had walked through these doors, it had been under threat, fear, and heartbreak. Now she stood here with her son beside her, and her husband watching her with something like awe. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Ethan came beside her. "It's just a house," he said. "You're what makes it home." Noah ran ahead, exploring, his laughter echoing through the hallways. He stopped under a chandelier and looked up. "Can I have a room with a window?" he asked eagerly. Ethan chuckled. "You can have whichever one you want." "Even this one?" Noah pointed toward the grand staircase. Ethan smiled. "Even that one." Mrs. Carter touched his shoulder gently. "The east room gets the morning sun," she said. "It's warm. It used to be your father's." Noah grinned. "Then that's mine." Grace laughed, tears of joy filling her eyes. Ethan squeezed her hand, and for a brief moment, time folded in on itself. The lost years melting away, replaced by a fragile but unbreakable present. The days that followed became a slow, gentle healing. Every morning, Grace helped Noah with his vitamins and read to him by the window while Ethan handled work from home. He had called his board the day after returning and told them he was stepping back temporarily. The shock on the other end of the line had been almost comical. "Mr. Carter, is everything all right?" one of the partners had asked. "Everything is better than all right," Ethan had replied before hanging up. He spent his mornings making breakfast, his afternoons helping Noah draw rockets and stars, and his evenings walking through the garden with Grace. The mansion began to feel lived in again. Laughter filled the dining room. Mrs. Carter joined them every night, quieter now, humbled but present. Sometimes she would watch Grace and Noah across the table and smile faintly, as if memorizing them. One night after dinner, as Grace tucked Noah into bed, Ethan lingered by the doorway. The boy was already half asleep, clutching his favorite drawn. A stick-figure family holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Above it, he had written in uneven letters, "My family." Grace leaned down and kissed his forehead. "Sleep well, little astronaut." She turned off the lamp. Ethan wrapped an arm around her as they stepped into the hall. "You did good," he said. "We both did." She looked up at him, eyes soft. "You really think this will last?" "It will," Ethan said, "because this time we'll fight for it together." Downstairs, Mrs. Carter was sitting in the conservatory, staring out at the garden. Ethan joined her. The air smelled faintly of roses, the same scent that used to fill his childhood summers. She didn't turn when she spoke. "He's a good boy. You did well." Ethan smiled faintly. Grace did well. Mrs. Carter nodded slowly. "I was wrong about her. About many things." Her voice trembled. "When you're young, you think pride keeps you safe. When you're old, you realize it only keeps you alone." Ethan said nothing, letting her words hang. She turned to him then, eyes glistening. "I don't deserve forgiveness, but thank you for letting me try." Ethan's throat tightened. "We all made mistakes. What matters is that we're fixing them." She reached for his hand. "I don't have much time left, Ethan. My heart. The doctor said it won't last long. I'm not afraid, but I want to spend what I have watching you three live the life I stole from you." Ethan's eyes burned. "You'll see every part of it," he said quietly. She smiled sadly. "I hope so." The following week, Noah was strong enough to go outside. Grace wrapped him in a light jacket, and they all walked through the garden together. The boy's laughter rang through the air as he chased butterflies between rose bushes. Mrs. Carter sat on a bench, watching with tears in her eyes. Grace joined her, sitting at a respectful distance. The silence between them was soft this time, not brittle. After a while, Grace spoke. "Do you ever regret it?" Mrs. Carter sighed. "Every day." Grace nodded. "I did too, for leaving, for not trusting Ethan. But I think sometimes we all have to break before we understand love." Mrs. Carter smiled faintly. "You're stronger than I ever was." Grace looked at her. "No, just lucky enough to get a second chance." They sat there until the sky turned gold. From across the garden, Ethan called out, waving, "Dinner's ready." Noah ran toward them, his hair catching the light. Grace stood and brushed her hands on her dress. "Come on, sweetheart. Time to eat." Mrs. Carter stood slowly, holding on to Grace's arm for balance. They walked together back to the house, step by careful step. That evening, Margaret served roast chicken and mashed potatoes. Simple, warm food that filled the room with comfort. Noah told stories between bites, about rockets, about how he was going to build a ship big enough for all of them. Grace laughed until she cried. Mrs. Carter listened, eyes shining, and even joined in with the memory of Ethan as a boy chasing fireflies in the same garden. After dinner, Noah insisted they all look at his latest drawing. It was bigger this time, colors brighter. 4 figures stood under a tree: a man, a woman, a boy, and an older lady. Above them, he had written, "My family forever." Ethan swallowed hard. "It's perfect, buddy." Noah grinned. "Can we hang it in the big room?" Mrs. Carter leaned forward. "The one with all the family portraits?" Noah nodded. "That's exactly where it belongs," she said softly. Together they framed the drawing that night. Ethan lifted it onto the wall beside an oil portrait of his late father. The contrast was striking. The old world of formality beside a child's crayon world of love. For the first time, the house felt complete. Weeks passed. Noah grew stronger. Grace began teaching art classes at the local community center, something she'd always dreamed of. Ethan volunteered to read stories to children at the hospital where Noah had been treated. Mrs. Carter spent her mornings in the garden, often with Noah by her side, teaching him how to prune roses and telling him stories of her youth. One evening, Ethan found her sitting on the garden bench, the twilight painting her face with gold. She looked tired, but peaceful. He sat beside her quietly. She spoke without looking up. "Do you believe people can change, Ethan?" "I think people remember who they really are," he said. Mrs. Carter nodded slowly. Then maybe I've finally remembered. She leaned back, closing her eyes, listening to the laughter of Grace and Noah echoing from the porch. Ethan watched her and felt something heavy lift. The next morning, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Margaret found Mrs. Carter still sitting in the conservatory chair, her hands folded neatly, a faint smile on her lips. The sun fell gently on her face. She was gone, peacefully, as if carried away by the same light she had spent her life chasing. When Ethan told Grace, she wept softly but said through tears, she finally found peace. The funeral was small, private. The priest spoke of forgiveness, of love conquering pride. As the coffin was lowered, Noah placed a small bouquet of white roses on it and whispered, "Goodbye, Grandma. Thank you for finding us." Afterward, back at the house, Ethan stood by the window where his mother used to sit. He thought of her last words, of her confession, of the way she had looked at her grandson with tears of awe. Grace came beside him, slipping her hand into his. "She's with the stars now," Grace said. Ethan nodded. "And watching our little astronaut." Noah was in the garden, laughing as he tried to catch a butterfly. The air was warm, full of life. Grace rested her head on Ethan's shoulder. "You think she's proud of us?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I think she finally understands love." Months later, the Carter mansion no longer felt like a mansion. It felt like a home. The grand dining room became a classroom for Noah's art projects. The marble halls echoed with laughter and footsteps. Grace filled the house with warmth and music, and every evening they lit candles by the window for Mrs. Carter, a quiet ritual of remembrance and gratitude. One night, as stars scattered across the sky, Noah sat between his parents on the porch. He pointed upward. "See that one? That's Grandma. She's watching us." Grace smiled, pulling him close. "Maybe she's making sure you eat your vegetables." Noah giggled. Ethan laughed softly, kissing the top of his son's head. The world around them was calm again. The wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere in the distance a train whistle sounded, faint and haunting. It reminded Ethan of how far they'd come, of the long road from pain to peace. He turned to Grace, her eyes glowing in the starlight. "We made it," he whispered. She nodded. "We made it home." Noah yawned, leaning against him. "Tell me a story, Daddy." Ethan smiled. "About dragons?" Noah nodded sleepily. Ethan began, his voice low and warm. "Once upon a time there was a man who lost everything because he didn't know what love really was. But then he met two angels who showed him that love isn't about having everything. It's about never giving up on each other. And they lived," Grace added softly, "happily ever after." Noah grinned drowsily. "I like that one." Ethan looked up at the sky, at the same stars that had watched them through every trial. In their silent light, he saw forgiveness, redemption, and the fragile beauty of second chances. He held his family close, feeling Grace's heartbeat against his, feeling Noah's small hand in his. The house behind them glowed with soft golden light. The past was no longer a weight, but a story, one that had finally found its ending. And as the night deepened, the Carter family sat beneath the endless sky, together, whole and unafraid of tomorrow.